Look at the weather.
It's beautiful here.
Non-stop rain.
Oh, man, it is a blazer out there.
It's cold and it's shivery.
It is cold.
Really coming down here.
I really enjoy your weather reports.
From the All Indiana Podcast Network, we're talking weather in a whole new way. From historical events to what's coming up, plus weather news, science, safety, fun facts, and more.
I like where this is going.
This is Weather Weekly. Weather Weekly with Wish TV Storm Track 8 meteorologist Marcus Bailey.
Hey, welcome to you. It's episode number 21. Good to be with you. Had a week off and enjoyed the time with family. And hopefully you had a fantastic 4th of July holiday week. And I'll tell you what, man, it was just kind of a good old Midwestern July 4th weather-wise over the weekend. Got gradually warmer. Friday was beautiful. Saturday was really nice. Sunday, the holiday itself was toasty. We got up to 86, I think, officially in Indianapolis. But, man, you know, it felt like July 4th. It was good weather. It was a little humid, but not bad. I saw a lot of people just enjoying the time outside. Fireworks displays, whether it was public or private, man, they were hopping. And Monday, I know a lot of people enjoyed the extended holiday. Was pretty nice as well. Got up to 89. I enjoyed a good pool day with the kiddos as soon as I got done off of work at Wish TV. So good to be with you here. I am meteorologist Marcus Bailey from Wish TV in Indianapolis, Indiana. And again, had the week off and kind of recharged and rejuvenated. And we're back at it. And looking forward to the discussion today, which is going to be kind of a little more on a personal level here, kind of my journey through the broadcast world. And I'm going to be kind of open, and I might have to do this in kind of two parts here. And I don't want to be too self-serving because I have made a ton of mistakes. And I know a lot of people that have reached out to me are college students or people that are interested in getting into the field of meteorology. And so if what I can say can kind of help you along in your journey, then I think that is kind of the purpose of this week's episode here. So that's what we'll spend some time on. And again, we may break it down into a couple parts. I've been doing this for almost 15 years. So there's a lot of mistakes that I've made in 15 years that I've learned from, and hopefully that I can kind of pass along and help you learn from them as well. And a lot's changed in that 15 years as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that here. Let's talk about weather headlines. First, we'll start with local stuff here first. And man, did we open up July with a bang. Some really heavy rain that we had to deal with specifically on the 1st and 2nd of July. Just looking at the stats right now. So today is the 6th. So I'm going to go from the 1st to the 5th. We are already ranked as the 8th wettest start to the month of July at 2.78 inches of rainfall in Indianapolis. There are areas that have far more inches in terms of rainfall than that. There were some areas that picked up, especially on the north and northeast side of Indianapolis. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, but I know there were estimates between 4 and 6 inches of rainfall in about that 48-hour stretch. So there was some immense amount of rain. Thankfully, we kind of dried things out once we got through that kind of Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday, I guess, time frame. Friday ended up being dry and beautiful, and then the weekend we dried out as well. So we were obviously concerned with maybe some flash flooding issues. Anytime you get that amount of rain in a short amount of time, the flooding threshold is extremely low. And that was going to be the concern. We were in a very tropical air mass before the front did move through. So it wouldn't have taken much to create some big issues. And indeed, we did have some high water in spots a couple of those mornings, but it quickly resolved itself once some of those storms kind of moved off to the east. But it's interesting because now, just in that, and not in a day span, but really in an hour span, we're over halfway to our July goal. Usually 4.42 inches of rainfall is the new average for the month of July. That puts us at the 3rd wettest month of the year, followed by April then. So it goes June, May, July, April. Those are the top 4 in order of wettest. And it's interesting because June, we weren't doing all that great. And I guess this will kind of transition to the report that came in from the Weather Service. It's on their homepage, Indianapolis Weather Service, I should say, weather.gov/IND. Their climate summary for the month of June: 33rd warmest on record in Indianapolis, and it tied for the 13th wettest on record in Indianapolis. And it took a while to get there. It wasn't looking real promising precip-wise, but it was near the kind of tail end of the month where we really started picking up some steam and kind of got us back to average and above average in some areas. In fact, just looking at some of the reporting stations, for most, we did run above average. Indianapolis, we ended up with 2.51, so about 7.51, so about 7.5 inches. That's almost 2.5 inches on the plus side. The wettest day was the 19th. We picked up just over 2 inches of rainfall that day. Lafayette ended up being about 1/4 of an inch in the hole, 4.35 inches of rain. Muncie, about 1/2 an inch in a deficit, 4.18 inches. Terre Haute was on the plus side of nearly 2 inches at 6.59 inches. The wettest, 3.5 inches on that same day, the 19th. And all of those reporting stations had the longest dry stretch of 5 days in a row. That was between the 13th and the 17th before we started getting kind of the heavy rain in here. So good to see that kind of righting the ship. So we're in good shape. No major drought concerns or anything like that. Hottest day in Indianapolis, 93. That was on the 12th and the 18th. So we did it twice. We did hit officially 100 in Lafayette. We did that on the 18th. 95 was the hottest day in Muncie on the 12th. Terre Haute, 96 on the 18th. Bloomington, 94 on the 12th and the 18th. And Shelbyville, 96. You hit on the 18th. So the 18th was the hottest day for the month of June. And I believe, at least in Indianapolis, that also is the hottest day that we've had so far this summer. So we'll keep an eye on that. Certainly a lot of summer to go. July can typically be a very hot month. So can August. We're forecasting a high of 92 on this particular day, July 6th, that we are recording this. We'll see if we hit that. But obviously we could make a run at that 93 and maybe tie the hottest day. Maybe we even exceed that. So we'll talk more about that in the forecast at the end of the podcast. National headlines, really the big story here is now Tropical Storm Elsa. It has created some problems down in the Caribbean. As we speak right now, the 5 a.m. advisory on Tuesday, July 6th, did have it as a tropical storm. It had already crossed over Cuba. It was starting to reach the outer banks, the outer bands, I should say. Was starting to reach the Florida Keys, and the 5 a.m. advisory had 60-mile-per-hour winds on that tropical storm. The forecast track not anticipated to strengthen to a hurricane. It did at one point become a hurricane. It's the first hurricane of the Atlantic season. It did reach Category 1 status, I believe, with 75-mile-per-hour sustained winds, down to 60 now. Could get up to 65-mile-per-hour winds, but that would still keep it at a strong tropical storm and likely to make landfall along the Florida Gulf Coast between Tampa and Tallahassee, likely late Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning. Really the big problem with Elsa, at least in terms of the United States, is going to be some torrential rain. Around the Keys, they could see as high as 8, maybe as high as 10 inches of rainfall anywhere along the Gulf Coast, specifically between that Tampa and Tallahassee area. They're probably looking at 4 to 6 plus inches of rainfall there. So you'll get some coastal flooding. Storm surge isn't going to be significantly high, but it could cause some flooding with addition of the heavy rainfall. You're probably looking at 3 to 5 feet in terms of storm surge there, and then should be quickly out of there by, let's say, late Wednesday night and Thursday, and then it moves up the Atlantic seaboard, Georgia into the Carolinas and Virginia. It's not anticipated to go back out to sea before coming over any of those areas, but it will be dumping a lot of rain as a tropical depression. So this will be something that's in the headlines probably for the next 4 to 5 days, at least on a national perspective. And we are well on our way through the Atlantic hurricane season. July is always an interesting month because you really start to see stronger tropical waves coming off the coast of Africa, and that's where you can start to get some of the more intense tropical development this time of year. And then you get later in the year, you can start to see more tropical development really getting going into the Gulf. So it kind of goes in phases here, but something to watch for. Again, we've mentioned several times in this podcast that this was supposed to be an above average hurricane or tropical season for the Atlantic. Not like last year. Last year was a record breaker, but still above average in terms of named storms. So we will keep an eye on that. That's the headlines for this July 6th. Coming up, again, I'm going to just talk about my personal journey into the world of weather, kind of what got me interested, and we'll kind of walk you along on the good, the bad, and the ugly on my career so far, and hopefully kind of guide those that are looking into broadcast meteorology, hopefully giving you some guidance and hopefully leading you away from some of the mistakes that I made. That's coming up next here on Weather Weekly.
Audible's romance collection has something to satisfy every side of you. When it comes to what kind of romance you're into, you don't have to choose just one. Fancy a dalliance with a duke, or maybe a steamy billionaire. You could find a book boyfriend in the city and another one tearing it up on the hockey field. And if nothing on this earth satisfies, you can always find love in another realm. Discover modern rom-coms from authors like Lily Chu and Ali Hazelwood, the latest romantasy series from Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros, plus Regency favorites like Bridgerton and Outlander. And of course, all the really steamy stuff. Your first great love story is free when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
Welcome back to episode number 21 here of Weather Weekly. It is an honor to have you here hanging out. And as I talked about a couple of weeks ago and leading up here to this segment, I'm going to spend some time talking about kind of my journey into the world of broadcast meteorology. And I say it not to be self-serving. It's more of, hopefully it can be used as some help. If you talk to a handful of different meteorologists. I've interviewed, most of the team here at Storm Track 8. We've talked to Tara, to Stephanie, to Ashley, and even Randy. All of our stories are completely different on how we ended up at Wish TV. And so there are so many different avenues that you can take. And so one may fit you better. And that's kind of the whole purpose of this. I know that there's a lot of young adults that are listening to this, mainly that are interested in the field of meteorology. And so if any of this can kind of help you along your journey, then that's kind of the main purpose of why we do some of these interviews. So we've talked to other meteorologists into the field, from former interns of mine, former coworkers of mine, along my 15-year career, almost 15-year career. So hopefully for those of you that are interested in getting into this field, you can use it kind of as a springboard and give you some ideas. Sure, a lot has changed in 15 years, right? The way that we apply for jobs is different. The technology is different. The use of social media is significantly different than when I first got into the business 15 years ago. But there are still some tried and true things that I still think hold very true to being a marketable candidate when you are applying for a broadcast meteorology position. So let me kind of take you back to the beginning. All right. So I wasn't always crazy about weather. In fact, one of my earliest stories I can recall, and I can't remember the age, I would guess I was probably in the range of maybe 7, 8, 9 years old. I was at a Cub Scout camp in north central Indiana, I believe. Can't remember the name. The nickname was Camp K. So if anybody you're listening and you know that, I think it was specifically for Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts. It was a very long Native American name, if I remember correctly, but it was nicknamed Camp K. Anyway, was there for the entire week. We got rolled by a massive supercell. And it had been predicted through the day because a lot of our camp counselors had warned us, said, hey, look, if we sound these sirens, and I think we even ran a drill that day, if we sound these sirens while you are sleeping, you need to get up and you're going to go basically to the main dining hall. It was the largest building on that campground. So you could hear thunder off in the distance, and you just kind of felt like it was going to get pretty nasty. The humidity was really high, just some of the observations that I had. And the sirens end up sounding. And so all of these, and there was different Cub Scout troops. I would guesstimate there was anywhere between 100 to 200 kids, plus all of the parents, the chaperones that were there. And we all had to kind of mosey on into this dining hall. And it was pretty late at night. I mean, this is in the summer. And then this is before we had to switch clocks. But I'm guesstimating it's probably like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And we went in there, and man, that storm just lightning, just tons of it. Well, this was the first experience I ever had where lightning actually struck the building. I'd never encountered lightning so close to where it was a flash of light, instantaneous clap of thunder. And it was more of a bang, right? Any of you that have dealt with a very nearby lightning strike, you felt that. You kind of felt the hairs on the back of your neck kind of stand up. And then the interesting thing was I smelled immediate burning. This was a wooden building, right? It mimicked a log cabin. I don't think it was exactly a log cabin, but it was a wood building. And so, but it was pouring down rain. So if the lightning struck that, I think what it did basically is it hit the side, kind of overhanging where like you're real close to the gutters. Because I think the next day we actually saw it and you could see that there was a little bit of damage. There was wood on the ground. And so I'm assuming that's probably where the lightning strike was. But it was raining so hard that it put it out. That scared the living daylights out of me. And for a while, I was terrified of thunderstorms. I remember going back home and I was terrified of them. My dad, I give credit to him, he kind of eased a little bit of that. Whenever we had thunderstorms, he taught me the whole how far away was the lightning. That I was more afraid of lightning than anything. Tornadoes didn't scare me up to that point. Hail didn't scare me. It was the lightning, and I think it was just solely because of that experience. But my dad, I remember distinctly sitting out on our front porch, and he would say, all right, when you see a flash of lightning, go, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000, and then, you do the math, and then that would tell you the distance once you heard the rumble of thunder on how far away that lightning strike was. So I remember many nights in bed, and I would start to get kind of anxiety about a thunderstorm, and I'd see the flashes of lightning. I would start counting to myself. I'm like, oh, well, it's X miles away. That always kind of eased my anxious feelings, if you will. And what's interesting is I have kind of carried that over to when we did do school talks prior to COVID, and hopefully those are going to be starting back up again. There's always the wheelhouse for me is always second and third grade. It's a great age to talk about because they always ask great questions. They're very bright. They want to soak in all that knowledge. But that's also an age. Same age where I started kind of getting that fear of thunderstorms. And so you'd get a lot of kids that are kind of scared of that. And so, that was my job. If I'm making, these stops, to kind of talk to these kids about, how can you ease that fear of lightning and thunder and tornadoes and hail, and I hope to think that at least some of my advice was helpful for some of them. But that really wasn't like where I got really ready for a career in meteorology, but that's kind of my earliest memory of weather. Now, fast forward maybe a couple of years, and, I started kind of being a little more independent on watching shows. I'd kind of graduated from watching, cartoons for the most part. I was kind of getting more into Sports Center, watching the highlights every morning. And then I came across the Weather Channel, and I don't know if I was really big in on weather per se. I just was fascinated with maps. And I think this is a lost art nowadays because of, GPS and everything's on your phone. I loved looking at road maps. Lots of summers, I remember mapping out any destination we were going to, whether it be Indianapolis, when we were living in Muncie. A lot of times mapping out our route to Kings Island, which is just north of Cincinnati. Quick 90-minute drive for us growing up. I loved doing that. I think that's where kind of my fascination of weather started. Not so much with weather, but it started with maps. I was really good at, I knew all the states and the capitals at a very young age. Credit to my elementary school growing up that we would have quizzes in elementary school of naming all the counties in Indiana. And to this day, at 40 years old, I'm able to still do that, which obviously is quite beneficial in my line of work and in my location, working in Indianapolis, working in the capital city of Indiana, being able to know that. And I was always fascinated with the Weather Channel and just the maps that they would use, and just knowing other parts of the country, interstates and road names and county names and that kind of thing. I love that. I loved going to new cities and turning on the Weather Channel. It's interesting. I don't know if it's like this anymore. It's been a while since I've actually stayed in a hotel, but at least when I remember growing up, and the first time I went down to Florida, my dad took my sister and I down there, and we stayed in St. Augustine. First chance to see the ocean, and what I loved is there was a nasty storm coming in off the ocean, and so first thing I wanted to do was go to the Weather Channel. Well, they didn't have a list. I believe we stayed at a Holiday Inn in St. Augustine, and they didn't have a TV list like most hotel rooms do, but I turned the TV on, first thing that's on, Weather Channel. And a lot of hotels did that back then. It was the first thing, because that's, when people are traveling, that's the first thing they wanted. This was before smartphones, so there was no easy way to get that forecast unless you actually turned on the television, and it wasn't a guarantee that you were going to get the forecast right at that minute at a local news station. Say that would have been Jacksonville for that market down there. So love that. And so I sat there and watched the Weather Channel, watched the storm roll in off the ocean. It was awesome. But just like learning about the whole area just via the Weather Channel, and just they had the local on the 8s, if you guys remember that. And I love that. You'd see the radar and just, all the interstates and everything else. And so that was fun. Loved going to rest areas on those big long trips, whether you're going down to Florida or, wherever. And going to the rest stops, and a lot of those rest stops, you could pull out free maps. And so I bet I still at home, I have some of the old ones, and I'm just drawing out different routes. Well, this is how I'd get here. And if there was construction here, this is how I'd go here, and blah, blah, blah. And if I wanted to see X, Y, and Z, if I didn't want to go through Atlanta, but I want to get to Florida, this is how I'd go around. And it was fun. Love that kind of stuff. So that was kind of the beginning for me. And so I guess that's kind of like my first tip. If you're interested in weather, I think one of the most important things is you need to have a love and appreciation for maps. And like I said, it's kind of a lost art because everything is on digital now. Everything is on cell phones or your iPad. And we've kind of lost the art of, mapping out a trip and saying, look, this is where we need to go. We just wait for Siri or whoever it is, to jump on and say at the next exit, turn right. In 10 miles, you're going to turn left. And look, I'm not dissing the technology. I use it frequently, and it's great to have. But it's also made me kind of lazy because I don't know the area probably as well as I should. I fell into that trap in Peoria quite a bit when I was there. It's a little bit different here in central Indiana because I grew up here, with the exception of, 10 years basically out of 40. I was living here in Indiana and very familiar with many of the roads and how to get to certain places. And Indiana's not a really tough place to get through, the interstate system, all roads lead to Indianapolis, and everything in Indiana in terms of county roads, for the most part, go north, south, east, west. So it's pretty easy to kind of find your way out of a pickle if you get lost or anything like that. So, but again, that's kind of my tip number one. Learn maps. And I've said this to so many interns, because if you're getting into this business, for example, my first job was in Lima, Ohio, not far away from where I grew up. It was only a 2-hour drive. But I didn't really know much about Lima. I had passed through it many times because we had family that lived in the Massillon, Canton, Ohio area, so northeast Ohio, just south of Cleveland. So we kind of took that way up, and we'd pass by Lima. I knew of the town of Wapakoneta because on I-75 they had the Neil Armstrong exhibit. And so I knew Lima was kind of the next in line. And so I knew kind of the route that we took to get around Lima, but anything after that, I didn't know much. Didn't know any of the county names. Didn't know some of the town names around there. The biggest mistake, and I have run into it, and I think the easiest way to lose credibility as a meteorologist, as a broadcast meteorologist, is mispronouncing town names. Because these are people that are watching you that have lived there their entire life. You have lived there maybe a week, and you are supposed to go on television, sound credible to give a forecast, and you may be mispronouncing town names, and you will get emails. I guarantee you'll get emails. Example, let's go to Lima, Ohio, for one. Some people called it Lima. Many people in my post-Lima days, when I was I moved on to Peoria, or even here in Indianapolis, they were like, so you started your job off in Lima. Well, I mean, there is a Lima, Peru, but this was Lima, Ohio. There was a town in Lima's area, DMA is what we call it, spelled Celina, which a lot of people would call Selena. I had a friend in college, spelled her name the same way. It was pronounced Selena. It's pronounced Salina. Now, I lucked out because Salina was a town that we drove through many of times. In fact, that was kind of a pit stop for us for lunch when we were going to see relatives in Northeast Ohio. But I did end up making some of those errors in Peoria. There were a bunch of names. I think the first one I messed up, spelled Sanjose. You would look at that as San Jose. It was actually San Jose. There was a town that was spelled exactly like Lafayette in Lafayette, Indiana was spelled, but it was pronounced Lafayette. That was in the Peoria, Illinois DMA. And I think both of those I messed up. Even here in Indiana, I believe I made a mistake, and there is a town, I believe in Howard County, so near Kokomo. I'd have to double check. I know it's in north central Parsons of central Indiana. But it's spelled like Galveston, Texas. Not pronounced Galveston, it's pronounced Galveston. I know not a huge difference, but I got an email almost immediately after I said it. So again, knowing your maps, knowing road names that go through some of these towns, knowing county names, knowing the pronunciation of these towns, huge. And you may not think it makes a big difference because, look, we spend so much time if I talk to any intern, the biggest thing that they are worried about and what they need to focus their time on is severe weather. And severe weather is such a small part of this job. I could probably count on two hands in 15 years, two hands, where I've had to go into long form severe weather coverage. And when I say long form, I'm talking about over an hour or even over a half hour for that matter. I could probably count on maybe two hands. It just doesn't happen a lot. And you have to keep in mind, too, mine's probably a little bit higher than others because we are on a CW affiliate. And so we don't have the same kind of primetime shows. We don't have the same kind of morning newscast. We're in newscasts for a lot of the day. So, we have that ability to break in really whenever we want. But I always think the focus kind of goes into severe weather coverage, which, look, it is important. Severe weather coverage can make or break your career. It absolutely can. If you blow a massive severe weather event, it's hard to live that down, especially in today's age where, social media is king. It will live there forever. But when you do really well, people just say, hey, you did a good job, unless you have like kind of generational events, like James Spann had to handle, which we've talked about in the podcast with the April 27th outbreak. He's got, hundreds of those. And I think he's probably an exception. But for the most part, people aren't going to say, they're not going to remember the really good ones unless it's a, generational event. It's just, you did your job, but they will never forget the ones you've messed up or you've blown. So it's important, but it's not the most important thing, I don't think. All right. So that's kind of my lesson number one, and kind of takes you back to my beginnings of my love for meteorology. I'm kind of trying to go in a timeline here, and I don't want to make this one too long. So we may have to break this up into a couple of parts because I've got a lot of lessons. I've messed up a lot in this career, and hopefully you can learn from a lot of my mistakes. Lesson number two is, I was very fortunate. Once I really started kind of getting that love of meteorology, and specifically broadcast meteorology because of the Weather Channel. That was something I was pretty set on knowing what I wanted to do with my career. And that probably came in middle school for me. I think I was pretty set on that, and I really didn't waver through high school. Now, my high school, I went to a very tiny school. Shout out to Westall High School, Gaston, Indiana, just northwest of Muncie. This was in the mid and late 90s. The technology for a lot of small schools just wasn't there. To be able to do school newscasts, announcements, that kind of thing. We started kind of doing that later in the in my high school career. Specifically junior and senior year, but certainly not to what it is now. I mean, I see a lot of high schools. Some high schools now have green screens. They can actually do weather forecasts now. So a lot's changed. So if this is something you're interested in and you are young, get going early, because what I always tell aspiring meteorologists, whether they are my interns or they're younger, and I'm talking to school age kids, is this job is like anything. I like to relate a lot of things to sports. I love sports, and I try to relate it to that. But I mean, you could relate it to maybe even theater or music. This job is very much like all of those, and you get better at it the more you do it. And if you can get going early on, it gives you a distinct advantage over someone that does not have years and years and years of practice, right? There's obviously going to be people that are just naturally gifted at certain things. We see it in sports. We see it in music. It is the same thing with television as well. There are just people that are naturally gifted that there's nothing that you can really do to change that. Specifically in broadcast, your voice. I've kind of got a husky, medium range, maybe on the higher end pitch voice for a male. I never had a really great radio voice. Wish I did. I wish I could have that big booming radio voice. It just plays so well on television. That wasn't God's gift to me. But I've made it work. I think that I have a very distinct voice now that people can recognize. And I think I've become more comfortable with it. But again, it took time for me to get there. And so, going through my journey, whereas I didn't have a lot of opportunity in my high school, I give a big shout out to one of my teachers, Christy McGuire, who did a lot of my technology classes, computer technology classes back then. She had set up for seniors a job shadowing program, and it was with her. It wasn't just her. Kay Piles, who was my English teacher at Westell, also was on board with this, and we had to do a project for one each semester of job shadowing a job. Now, they recommended that you do something you're interested in. A lot of my friends, you're a senior in high school, they may not know exactly what they are interested in. And a lot of them already knew what they were interested in because I went to a very rural school. There was a long generation of farm families there. So they already knew what they were doing. But I did take advantage of that. And I've tried to, I've talked a couple of times at my old high school talking about that because they still do that project and really the importance of where it has led me to today. And here's why. So my first job shadowing project was with Jay Garrison and Mike Michaels back then it was WERK radio and Max. Let me see if I remember the numbers, 93.5 and 96.7, I believe. I might be off on the numbers. I know 96.7 was right. And 1240 WHBU. So this was located in Daleville, Indiana. WHBU serviced Anderson. The two FM stations, 93.5 and 96.7, I believe one was in Hartford City. The other was in Alexandria, I believe. So that's northern Madison County. And then WERK was a Muncie antenna. And so that was one of the bigger ones. And then at that time, it was an oldies station. So I job shadowed them because I figured, okay, radio is interesting to me. It's local. I don't have to travel very far, whatever. So Mike Michaels was the program director of that group of radio stations. Jay Garrison was the assistant program director. Now, you have to remember, I'm still very green and naive to the idea. I loved listening to AM radio. 700 WLW was one of my favorites, and it was live 24 hours a day out of Cincinnati. For a small market, I thought that was pretty impressive. I'd listen to WIBC out of Indianapolis a lot too, but they did some syndicated shows like Rush Limbaugh and that kind of stuff, so it wasn't always local. WLW was always local, and while Cincinnati news didn't really pertain to me, I was just more fascinated with people getting paid to talk for hours on end about local things. I thought it was cool. So I listened to a lot of radio, and I listened to FM radio too. I loved listening, as a kid. What was it, the Hot 9 at 9? So you had the best 9 music. And I was that kid that, dumped the cassette player into the radio and record all those songs. So I'd have them for later. Anyway. So I'm going into the radio station thinking everything is live, and I see this building. It very much kind of reminded me of a doctor's office. They're still in the same spot, by the way. But it reminded me of a doctor's office when you kind of first walk in, but it had a lot of windows, and you could see right when you walked into the main entrance, you could look into this main studio. And what I came to find out was the AM station. It was WHBU. It was kind of the larger of the studios, and everything was on computer, but you had a big board, right, that you were accustomed to seeing. They had several microphones, but no one was in there. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? And so Jay Garrison introduced himself to me and takes me back, and he kind of walks me around to some of the other studios, and there's nobody in there. Nobody. And I'm like, that was my first question to Jay. I'm like, so what's on the air right now? I'm like, are the DJs just kind of like on a lunch break or whatever? He's like, no. So he's kind of going through the whole automated system. Everything was pre-recorded, usually the day of, but outside of the morning shows, nothing was really live, which I was like, wow, that's crazy. And I was kind of bummed about it, but the more I worked into the field, I understood, so, but he kind of showed me through all of the automation and stuff like that. But the key takeaway to this is I spent the entire day with Jay, and what it ended up being, and he let me go on the air with him in one of his pre-recorded segments. So I got to listen to it that night, which was super cool because that was the first time I'd ever been on radio or television, to my knowledge, in a talking standpoint. And they offered me a part-time job when I left. And what's funny is my mom had been getting on my case because I needed a part-time job. So I had my own car. I needed to start paying for my gas, that kind of stuff. Didn't really want to work in fast food. Didn't want to do any of that. And so this was like answered prayer. I was like, are you kidding me? This is great. And so my job was going to basically entail, they'd have me work a lot of Friday and Saturdays, basically, in the evenings. And I'd be running the board for high school basketball at that time because football season had just wrapped up. So we were kind of starting basketball season. And so I ran the board for local high school basketball. A lot of these, the announcers were calling in via kind of a phone line, if you will. And then my job was basically to make sure that they were on the air and that I was running the commercial breaks for them when they called for breaks. And then making sure that we got regular programming on the air as the game concluded. I also was able to run the board for Purdue basketball, for IU basketball games, and then eventually for NASCAR races. We ran the radio broadcast on some of our stations for NASCAR races as well. So it started off just as kind of basic stuff with high school basketball, but I ended up working at this station basically through the rest of my high school career and then all the way through college. So it was a 5-year stretch, and it was the best part-time job I ever had because Jay Garrison is still there. Jay afforded me a lot of opportunity to grow to whereas I got to my senior year of college and I've had my full, rounds of meteorology classes and that kind of stuff. That they trusted me with severe weather coverage, but I was also doing news. So if there was some breaking news, we had our own news guy, but if there was some breaking news, they trusted me to jump on and actually do some news reporting. And I actually ended up getting to DJ on Sunday mornings. I was there specifically to kind of run the church shows, but there was a time slot where I could actually DJ in the morning and run contests and giveaways and that kind of stuff, and actually do it live. That was a lot of fun, and it was a really fun job, and I miss radio a lot. If I could have made a full-time career doing that, I probably would have stayed in radio. It would have been hard for me to get out, even though I love doing television and broadcast meteorology. That was such a fun job because it opened up so many doors to just doing a lot of things. When I during my time in college, the stations that I was at ended up merging with the big station, the big FM station. It was a top 40 station, still is top 40 station in Muncie called WLBC. That was the station that we all listened to get the school closings and everything else, and had been a number one station for a long time. And so that was like a big deal when they merged. And so that's where I ended up getting to DJ. That was a big deal to me. And so it opened up doors. When I graduated college, I decided I needed to kind of move on. I enjoyed the part-time work, but I wanted to kind of get out of Muncie. I'd lived in Muncie my entire life. I went to Ball State. And so I wanted to move down to Indianapolis, and I was actually able to get a job at WXNT in Indianapolis. That's also in the same building. It's Intercom Indianapolis as WZPL, which was another station I kind of grew up listening to, another top 40 station. But that afforded me some opportunities to help run some sports shows. Interestingly enough, if you're from Indianapolis, Jason Hammer, who is one part of the Hammer and Nigel show, which you can hear on WIBC now, was running a sports show on Sundays. It was called Sports Sundays. And I ran the board for him. I was basically his producer and helped put his show together and stuff like that. But he would also send me to Pacer games, Colts games. I think I went to many of the home games for Notre Dame for football. So a lot of cool opportunities there. That all stemmed from a job shadowing project. But here's kind of the kicker. That's a cool life experience. And I think, and I'll talk more about the importance of my radio career to my career now in a little bit. But I think the other important thing, and this is what really kind of sparked the bug, was, you remember I said that I had to do 2 job shadowing projects. So my first was at the group of radio stations in Muncie that I ended up working at through the rest of high school and college. I also met a meteorologist there because a lot of radio stations, especially back then, many still do now. Shout out to Nash FM 102.5 in Newcastle, Indiana, servicing Marion and Muncie as well. That is my home market. I do weather for them on the radio. There are still some meteorologists that do weather for local or terrestrial radio stations. I met a man by the name of Paul Poteet, who at the time was the morning meteorologist at Channel 6, the ABC affiliate here in Indianapolis. And I knew him very well just because at that point I had become a weather nerd in my senior year of high school. And so I watched all sorts of weather broadcasts on all the stations here in Indianapolis. So I was a bit starstruck when I got to meet Paul for the first time. But I didn't bother him too much. When he came in, I'd say hi, and that was about it. But after kind of chatting him up, just, friendly small talk after a while, I had to schedule my second job shadowing for the second semester. And so I asked Paul if I could hang out with him. He's like, well, here's the deal. He's like, I have no problem with that. He's like, but you live in Muncie, I work in Indianapolis, and he also works the morning show, which means he comes into work probably around 2 o'clock in the morning, which means I have to leave my house by around 1 because it's about an hour drive from Muncie to downtown Indianapolis. But I did that. And it was one of the coolest experiences that I ever had. And it really kind of, it sold me on, yes, this is the job that I want to do. I can't remember any aha moment that said, oh, that's cool. Oh, that's cool. It was just the process and just the flow of everything. The camaraderie they had. Back then it was Paul doing morning weather. They did have a traffic person at the time, although I don't think they were on site at that point. And then Grace Trahan was one of the anchors, and I believe Ray Cortopassi, who ended up working at another station in Indianapolis, and now he's at WGN in Chicago, were there. Just all great people, and it just was fun. And you'd think that I probably would want to bail, as soon as, the morning show was over at, I believe, 7 o'clock, because they ended up going to Good Morning America. But I ended up sticking around, I think, until around 10, 11 o'clock. I think Paul ended up having to kick me out and be like, all right, kid, go away. My day's over. I want to go home. But it was that was a cool experience. And what's funny is Paul had a hand in helping me get my job at WXNT in Indianapolis because he did weather for them. So when I graduated college and I was wanting to move on to a different radio station in Indy, Paul was a guy that I could say, yeah, I know Paul. Paul can stand up for me here, whatever. And so it's such a small world in the broadcast world. But that was it. And I mean, so again, it goes back to that lesson of take advantage of the opportunities that you are given even at a young age. If you know it's something that you want to pursue, and I guess this can apply for anything in life, but obviously my expertise is on how I pursued this and in the world of broadcast is, take those opportunities. It is an extremely small world when it comes to broadcast meteorology. Paul has been a friend of mine now, going on 20 plus years now. He's known me since I was 18. I'm 40 now. Paul and I have had the chance to actually work together, which that was a cool moment. when he was helping to help out on some extended times that we needed filled in here at Wish TV. He helped out a lot doing weather and traffic. And that was a cool moment because that was somebody that I, looked up to, still look up to, that I got a chance to actually work on air with him. That was pretty cool. And hopefully it was cool for him too, because he's seen me as this kind of annoying kid that bothered him a lot when I was in college, asking for tips, asking to kind of hang out with him, job shadow him some more. So he was the first, after my parents, when I got my first TV job, he was the first person I called. So it was pretty cool. But again, take those opportunities because, especially at that age, you don't get a lot of them. And even if you don't have a job shadowing opportunity, contact a local meteorologist. Whether you live around us, we've had to kind of cut back on like kind of job shadowing or visitors during COVID, but a lot of that's loosening up now. And so I loved just bringing guests in and showing them around and showing them what we do, having them watch a newscast, because I remember what a spark plug that was for me. It was such a huge deal for me. It was a driving motivator. And I think anytime that I feel down, because look, we all get down, right? When it comes to our jobs. I mean, it's still a job. But I'm fortunate enough to say I love my job still to this day, doing it 15 years. There's not a lot of people that can say that. If I ever kind of feel down about things, I can look back to that one moment and be like, look how much you love that. I can go back to that day with Paul and just kind of rehash all that, and those memories come flooding back and be like, yeah, right? Keep it simple. You're doing this because you love it, right? It's for the science, and there is a love of broadcast too. I think it's a combination of both. It's a reason why I like doing this podcast. This podcast kind of gets me back to my roots of radio. It reminds me, I'm using the same program, obviously slightly upgraded from 20 years ago, but the same program that I did stuff in radio when I first was doing it in part-time. And, I'm sitting in front of a mic and in front of a radio board, an audio board. And it just brings back memories. And while this is additional work, this podcast, it is fun because I enjoy the whole broadcast side of it. So I know I'm kind of rambling here, and I'm probably not going to go too much further. I think we kind of have to break this down in a couple of parts. And I haven't really gotten far through the timeline, and I haven't really gotten into the love of weather, which I think probably outweighs my love of broadcast. And really how that kind of evolved all through college and some of the influential people in my life and the lessons that I've learned. I'd love to hear your comments, though. I think I wanted to spend a lot of time on these things early on because I think it's important. I think, one, it's important to it lets you know kind of where I've come from and what my driving forces are, my background, but hopefully maybe it lights a spark under you in any career aspect on what you want to pursue. I think there's always people that are going to be willing to lend a hand and advice, especially at a very young age, if a kid shows passion about it. And I think, Jay and Paul both saw that I had as much passion as an 18 or 19-year-old kid can have. Maybe, there's a lot of things that are, when you're a kid that age, you've got a lot on your mind. You think you've got the world by the bootstraps, right? You think you know everything. You think the adults know nothing. And I was humbled a lot by this business as I got older, because I thought maybe I probably was a little too cocky and confident because I started this at a relatively younger age, doing it and getting paid for it in high school. But man, if I didn't have Jay or Paul to kind of give me that opportunity, who knows where I would have been right now? Because I probably wouldn't have had that opportunity all through college, and I maybe don't have the confidence to to keep pursuing it, because I'll get to it maybe in the next episode. We'll do it next week, because I've already been talking for 45 minutes. I don't want this podcast to go on for 2 hours. But to finish that thought, it wasn't super easy for me to get into this field. And there were a lot of moments that I felt like just quitting, and I was looking at other avenues, like a lot of college graduates do, right? Those of you that listen and you're in college right now, or you just graduated college, and maybe you majored in something and you're not necessarily in the field that you majored in, but you maybe want to get into that field, right? It's not easy. It's not easy to break in. And I felt the same way. So that I'll start talking about kind of my early journey on. I know, again, this sounds self-serving a little bit. I don't mean to be like, I just want to talk about myself, but I'm hoping that there can be some takeaways for you, and maybe some ideas for you that, if you're on that journey, that maybe it's beneficial for you. And that's the main purpose and the hope for all of this. Just kind of wrapping up my thoughts for this. So we'll talk more about that next week. We'll probably dive into kind of my journey through college, talk about some of the influential people there, a lot of the mistakes I made. Boy, were there a ton in college. And I'm going to be very open about them. And, if I don't talk too long about some of the mistakes I make there, we'll start moving on into my career. And I have made a lot of mistakes into my actual career of meteorology as well. So thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Hopefully you didn't get into too many eye roll moments here on kind of my early journey into this profession that I love and in broadcast meteorology. We'll have your full forecast looking ahead to the first week of July. That's coming up next year on Weather Weekly. All right, let's take a look at your forecast here for the week of July 5th. And again, we've had some stretches of hot weather here dating back since basically the holiday on July 4th. So 90 still in the forecast, I think, all the way through the 7th. We've had a stretch of dry days, which was welcome after the very soggy start we mentioned earlier in the podcast for July 1st and 2nd. Does look like we'll have some isolated storm chances for Wednesday and Thursday, so the 7th and the 8th. I think there's a lot of dry time, though. It's just kind of these pop-up afternoon storms, but some of those could have some heavy downpours. Friday, we'll have highs in the mid-80s, and I think we're dry all day to wrap up this shortened work week as we're in between systems. We'll have another system, it looks like, coming in for the weekend now as it appears early on. Saturday does appear to be probably the wetter of the 2 days, maybe best rain chance that we have over the next 6 or so with scattered showers and storms. I have highs in the mid-80s. We do have some chances for showers and storms as we head into the Sunday on to wrap up the weekend. But I don't think, as it appears right now, it's going to be a washout. Like I said, I think the day on Saturday is probably going to be the better of the 2 days for rain. And then Monday, maybe a chance of showers. We'll kind of hold into the mid 80s here as we start rolling into the early portions of next week. 6 to 10 day outlook, I should say, calling for equal chance of above or below average temperatures and above average precipitation. So a little bit more of an active pattern. The 8 to 14 day outlook calling for a slight chance for above average temperatures. Normal high by this time of year is into the mid 80s, and it does look like it's going to be an active 14-day stretch with above average precipitation anticipated. So get ready. We might have some wet weather that we're going to have to deal with as we start rolling through the next couple of weeks. My thanks to you for joining us on episode number 21. Hopefully you found it helpful, beneficial, or interesting, or any of that. And we'll talk more about just kind of our path here that we have in the love that we have for meteorology. We're always looking for your ideas, by the way. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or complaints, I'd love to hear them. You can email me anytime at marcus.bailey@wishtv.com. You can find me on social media as well. Marcus Bailey Weather on Facebook and at Marcus Bailey on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks again for joining me here on episode number 21. And don't forget to check out all of our other great podcasts here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Discover more Discover more from Storm Track 8 Weather and Wish TV. Online at wishtv.com and when you follow Wish TV on Facebook. Plus, be sure to check out more great podcasts from the All Indiana Podcast Network now at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.